I'm finding it hard to deal with regrets. I keep playing over and over in my mind what I should have done but didn't. How can I get beyond this? Regrets are a mechanism that we could certainly miss if they weren't there in any shape or form. If you imagine the opposite of a problem with regrets, in terms of being too many of them, if you imagine a complete lack of them, and we're just sort of remorseless, completely unrepentant, completely incapable of kind of looking back and seeing maybe how it might not have been such a great idea to do a particular thing, that could really be a problem. However, if we go the other way, it can also be a problem. And a lot of the time, regrets come from a noble place. They come from a desire for self-improvement. They come from a place of empathy or compassion, if maybe we've done something which wasn't ideal in terms of how it affected another person. However, sometimes the handling of regrets, the way that we use regrets, can have exactly the opposite of the intended purpose. There's a feeling that by continuing to focus on the regret, that in some way we're making good on what wasn't the case back then. Sometimes we're just hypnotized by the kind of the negativity of it, and we're just caught up in the problem. Or sometimes it's even a form of wish fulfillment in a way, where we're kind of playing through what we could have done or what we should have done, and then getting somewhat captivated by that. So moderation is probably the point here. There certainly is nothing wrong, particularly if something genuinely was problematic, something you're not happy with looking back. There's nothing wrong with noticing that, and there certainly is a sense that reflection has a role to play here. But what you probably want to do is do that well and do that properly if it's something significant. So not just you're walking around during the day and you're kind of beating yourself up and you're kind of half thinking about it a lot of the time. That might be too helpful. It might be a little bit more useful is to really stop, get the pen and paper out, or meditatively reflect on what's going on, or of course get some external support and just really clarify what is happening. Kind of understand the nuts and bolts of it a bit more, so it isn't just something you're caught up in, but it's something you're intentionally engaging with and then doing any work that maybe needs to be done with it. Now, it could be that, we're overplaying it in our own mind. If we are particularly sensitive about something, or if maybe self-esteem is an issue, what can then happen sometimes is we remember things in a way that's kind of excessively punitive towards ourselves. We're hard on ourselves in a way that we just don't need to be. It may not have appeared that way to other people, and even if it did, they mightn't have been that bothered by it, or they might have had their own issues at the time, etc. So sometimes we'll amplify something bigger than it really needs to be amplified, and sometimes by reflecting on it in an appropriate stance. So in other words, not just being caught up in the regret, but more stepping back and seeing the wood for the trees reflectively. Sometimes we're able to recognize that that's actually what we're doing. We're amplifying it more than we need to. Other times, though, we may genuinely see something that we're not quite that happy with. But the question really is what to do with it at that point. And Oscar Wilde has a great saying that I particularly like, which is that every saint has a past and every scoundrel has a future. So I think there is a lot to that, because even if you have done something that is bad or is problematic, the real question is, what are you going to do about it? And is beating yourself up, you're kind of sitting there meditating on the problem, is that really bringing things forward? Is it really progressing things? Is it really what growth is all about? So again, you're probably going to want to do a certain amount of that. But sometimes penance isn't actually helping the people we've hurt if we've hurt people. It isn't helping the damage done if damage was done. And it isn't helping us grow. So at a certain point, we get to question what we're actually trying to achieve. If you want to do penance, okay, do it and do it well and figure out what that actually means for you. But maybe what would be more productive is to actually grow and to develop in some way. So to move to a place of learning, really, and to say, well, how can I learn from that experience? How can I act differently in these types of situations? That's probably the minimum we're going to want to do. Or maybe how can I contribute back, either to that person or to other people in that situation, and really make good with action as well as just ideas. So what a nice thing it would be to put all the energy into that we were previously putting into beating ourselves up. And quite often when we really reflect on why we might have done a particular thing, very often there are lots of other circumstances involved. There's maybe the way we were taught, the way we've been treated, maybe just not being conscious at a given moment. And these, shouldn't be used as excuses, but it is important to do a little bit of a deep dive and try and make some sense as to how you got to where you got to. And when you do that, it tends not to be the case most of the time that you were there calm, conscious, present, and well within yourself, and you chose to do something which you would later regret. That's not really how it happens. It's usually we're distracted, or there's other stuff going on. We're displacing stuff that belongs somewhere and we're putting it somewhere else. It's things like that very often that tend to be the case. So if you want to do a proper analysis of it, again, being overly punitive towards yourself isn't necessarily helpful there. You want to see what role you've had in it. You want to see what role other external influences have had in it, or what role other people have had in it. And then maybe say to yourself, okay, what is the best way then of taking this forward? How can I learn from that experience and reinvent myself, or try and counterbalance things so some improvement is happening? So one thing you can also do, and this is a helpful framing device sometimes, is you can emphasize the present moment a bit more. And a way I like to think about this is, if any of you remember the TV show Quantum Leap, where basically the guy jumps from body to body, and that's kind of the device in each episode. At the end of the previous episode, he just jumps into another person's life. So we see that it's the main character, but other people see the main character as the person whose life he's jumped into. And so they don't know it's somebody different. So fascinating concept. Gets into all kinds of adventures, but why it's interesting is because he's in a situation where he ends up in the middle of a situation. He could be being chased by a crowd of angry villagers, or there could be any number of things going on. And he just finds himself in that situation. And he's no idea what the backstory is up until that point. And of course, he's certainly not to blame for whatever the backstory is, because he's just showed up. He's just arrived in that moment. But what he has to do is try and make it good. If some healing can happen, if he can make it work, if he can figure things out, then he frees himself up. He moves on. Next episode happens. And that was the basis of the TV show. So that's a kind of a useful way of thinking about what happens to us in life, because very often we just arrive in the present moment and we go, all right, what's going on? How did I get here? Why are people angry with me? What's been going on? And sometimes we find that we have been living our life rather unconsciously, not quite as unconsciously as the TV show. But by giving yourself a bit of space to not identify too much with everything up until that point, that can be a helpful way of not ignoring it, because we absolutely need to address those patterns, particularly if they're negative and affecting other people. It's very important that we do address them and make that a priority. But sometimes when we identify with them too much, we can't address them, because it's as if we are the problematic patterns, and then we get a bit stuck with them. So instead, kind of like Quantum Leap, if you can find yourself there arriving in a moment, if you can kind of relax your shoulders and say, well, okay, rather than beating myself up, let me figure out what's going on in this moment that I've arrived in time. What is the story that's led to this point? And then the important question is, what steps can I take to move things forward in a positive way? If you found this valuable, do like, subscribe, and share. And what's your experience? Do you have any questions or topic suggestions? You can contribute in the comments, on social media using hashtag bodymindself, or on jfl.com.